The rain hadn't let up for hours. It fell in sheets, blurring the city into watercolor grays and blues. Lily kept her head down as she walked, one hand gripping her umbrella, the other clenching her coat tight around her chest. Even with the fabric shielding her from the worst of the storm, she felt soaked skin to bone, heart to soul. The bookstore had been quiet that day, the kind of slow that made the minutes stretch and bend like taffy. She'd spent most of the afternoon shelving returns and rereading the same page of a novel she didn't care about. Rainy days were supposed to be cozy, romantic even. But for Lily, they only seemed to press more weight on her shoulders. At 32, she lived alone. Her marriage had ended 18 months earlier. Not with screaming or scandal, but with silence, drawn-out days of unspoken distance. Until one morning her husband had looked at her with tired eyes and said, "I think we're just ... She hadn't argued. She hadn't cried, not until he'd actually walked out the door. Since then, her world had shrunk. The bookstore. The grocery store. Home, repeat. So, when she saw the dog curled up under the rusted bench on the corner of Maple and Fifth, she almost walked past him. Almost. The shape of him barely registered at first, just another lump in the wet, gray evening. But something made her pause, a flicker of movement, a shiver. She turned back. He was small, but not young. His coat, once probably a golden brown, was now a patchwork of mud, matted fur, and scars. One of his ears flopped down while the other stuck up at an odd angle. His ribs showed clearly beneath his soaked body, and his paws were cracked and raw. But it was his eyes that rooted her to the spot. They were a deep, amber gold, too human, too tired. He looked at her without flinching. Without hope, just ... acceptance, like he had long ago learned not to expect. Kindness from strangers, the kind of look she had seen in her own reflection too many times. "Hey, buddy," she said softly, kneeling down despite the cold water soaking into her jeans. "What are you doing out here?" The dog didn't move. His gaze followed her, but he stayed curled tight, shivering with the kind of stillness that comes from exhaustion, not fear. She reached out her hand slowly. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." The dog sniffed the air but didn't react. Lily looked around. Cars passed, headlights reflecting on the wet pavement. No one slowed down. No one noticed. Her heart clenched. Without another thought, she unbuttoned her coat and gently wrapped it around the dog. He tensed but didn't resist. His body was cold. So cold. "You're coming with me," she whispered, standing and cradling him against her chest. He wasn't heavy, but he felt fragile, like something already halfway gone. She didn't have a leash. She didn't have a plan. But she had arms and a heart breaking open wider with every step toward home. The apartment was warmer than the streets, but not by much. She hadn't bothered turning on the heat most days. What was the point? But now she rushed to the thermostat, cranked it up, and laid him gently on a pile of towels by the heater. He didn't try to run. Didn't whimper or bark. He just stared up at her with those weary eyes, as if saying, "Do whatever you want. I've got nothing left to fight for." She filled a bowl with water and set it beside him. He didn't drink. Next, she opened a can of tuna. It was all she had. She placed it in a shallow dish and sat a few feet away, not wanting to scare him. After a moment, he sniffed the air, dragged himself forward, and began to eat slowly at first. Then, with a quiet desperation, Lily exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. When he finished, he licked his lips, turned to look at her again, and laid his head down. His body trembled, either from cold or exhaustion, probably both. She got up, grabbed an old fleece blanket from her closet, and tucked it gently around him. "You're safe now," she murmured. "You're safe." That night, she barely slept. She kept checking to make sure he was breathing, terrified that she'd wake to find he'd slipped away. But he hung on. At some point, she sat beside him and began talking. Not in a forced, cheerful voice like people sometimes used with animals, but just quietly, like she might to a stranger on a long train ride. She told him her name, that she worked in a bookstore, that she loved thunderstorms, hated olives, and hadn't laughed in months. And then, as if the dam inside her had cracked wide open, She told him about the divorce, how the silence in her home was louder than any argument could have been, how she didn't know who she was without someone else telling her, how she used to want kids, but now couldn't even imagine raising a houseplant. He didn't move. But he didn't leave either, and when she finally drifted off, curled up beside him on the floor, she felt warmer than she had in a very, very long time. Morning came with quiet light pouring through the curtains. Lily stirred, stiff from the floor, and turned to check on him. He was awake. Watching her, she smiled, gently touched his head. "You made it." He licked her hand once, slow, deliberate, grateful. A tear slipped down her cheek. "I guess we both did." That afternoon, she took him to the vet. No collar, no chip, malnourished, dehydrated, covered in old wounds. "He's been through hell," the vet said. Lily nodded. "So have I." When they asked for a name to write on the intake form, she hesitated for only a moment before saying, "His name is Chance." The first few weeks weren't easy. In fact, they were harder than Lily expected. Chance, though safe and warm, was haunted. He didn't bark. He didn't wag his tail. He barely moved from his spot by the window. Every sudden sound, a door closing, a car horn outside, the clatter of a dropped spoon made him flinch or shrink into himself. It broke Lily's heart in ways she couldn't quite explain. She recognized that kind of fear. The kind that doesn't go away just because you're no longer in danger. The kind that settles into your bones and whispers, "Don't get too comfortable." Still, she gave him space and time. She left the back door open during the day, hoping the breeze or the smell of flowers might tempt him outside. She placed bowls of fresh water in different corners of the apartment, just in case he was too afraid to leave his spot. She even rearranged the furniture to give him more room, more paths where he wouldn't feel cornered. And at night, she talked to him. She would sit across the room, legs folded under her, a warm mug between her hands, and just talk. About her day, about the books she was reading, about the strange and often funny things customers said at the shop. She didn't expect him to respond. She didn't need him to, but sometimes, when the stories grew softer and the room quieter, he would lift his head, just slightly, as if listening. 2 weeks after the vet visit, something changed. Lily had just returned from work, balancing a tote bag full of groceries and a damp umbrella. She opened the door, ready to step into the same heavy silence, but then she saw him. Chance was standing. Wobbly, unsure, but standing, waiting by the door. Her breath caught in her throat. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. He didn't run to her, he didn't even move, but his tail twitched. A small, subtle wag. It was enough to make her cry. That night she cooked rice and chicken and let him eat from her hand. He looked at her differently now, less like a ghost and more like a soul finding its way back into the world. They began to find a rhythm after that. Mornings started with a quiet walk around the block. Chance walked slowly, his steps cautious, his head low. But he walked. By the third week, he paused at every corner, sniffing lampposts and mailboxes. Sometimes he'd glance back at her as if to say, "Am I really allowed to do this?" She would smile and nod every time. "Yes, baby, you're allowed now." She bought him a collar, a deep forest green, the color of late summer. The tag read, "Chance if found, please call Lily," her number. She clipped it around his neck with trembling fingers, feeling something shift inside her. A knot slowly unraveling. A promise settling into place. He was hers now. One evening, a thunderstorm rolled in, violent and loud. Lily had always loved storms. As a child, she used to sit by the window with a blanket and hot cocoa, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. But now, as the sky cracked open and rain pounded the windows, Chance panicked. He paced in circles, whining, tail tucked so far under it nearly disappeared. His breathing grew sharp, shallow. She called to him gently. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's just noise. You're safe." But he couldn't hear her, not really. Fear had taken over, dragging him somewhere she couldn't reach. So she did the only thing she could. She lay down on the floor beside him, pulled his shivering body into her arms, and held him tightly. She placed her hand over his racing heart, whispering over and over, "I've got you. You're okay. You're safe now." Eventually his shaking slowed. His breathing evened. And though the storm raged outside, inside their small apartment, there was peace. As winter approached, Lily noticed how the light changed in the mornings. Everything seemed softer, quieter. The kind of quiet that wasn't empty but full of healing. Chance started following her from room to room. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to say, "I'm here. I want to be near you." When she painted, he lay near the easel. When she cooked, he rested by the doorframe, watching with sleepy eyes. When she read on the couch, he curled up at her feet. And one day, after a long walk in the fading autumn light, he did something that made her chest ache with joy. He rested his head on her lap. No fear. No hesitation. Just trust. Tears slipped silently down her face. She didn't speak, didn't move. She just let herself be exactly where she was. No past, no future. Just the quiet warmth of a dog who had once believed the world was done with him. And now, here he was, alive, healing. Loved. They weren't perfect. There were still days when Chance refused to leave his bed. Days when he growled at strangers or barked at the sound of a doorbell. He still hated loud noises. Still whimpered in his sleep sometimes, but Lily understood. Healing wasn't linear. It was slow and uneven and sometimes ugly. Just like hers had. And she too had her bad days when the silence in the apartment reminded her of the life she thought she would have. When she remembered anniversaries that no longer meant anything. When she sat alone at the dining table and wondered if anyone would ever love her the way she needed to be loved. But then Chance would crawl into her lap, rest his head against her chest, and sigh in that deep, contented way only dogs can. And in those moments, she felt whole again. You saved that dog's life. Her coworker Miriam said one afternoon at the bookstore. Lily smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Maybe, but honestly, I think he's saving winter melted into spring, and spring softened into summer. By now, Chance was no longer the ghost of the dog Lily had first found. His fur had grown back, thicker, shinier. His tail wagged more freely. He barked at squirrels with a kind of hesitant courage, as though learning to be bold. And some mornings, he'd even play his paws slapping the floor like a clumsy dancer, tail whipping the air. Lily called those moments his victory laps. But time, as it always does, left its mark. It began with a limp barely noticeable at first. Just a hesitation on his back leg when they walked. Lily thought it might be stiffness, the kind that fades once the muscles wake up. But it didn't fade. Soon he started sleeping more. Not just naps, but long, heavy hours curled up on the rug, breathing slow and deep. Then came the panting short walks, leaving him breathless, and the stairs. The stairs. He stopped trying. After a while, Lily began lifting him up each night, carrying his 40-pound frame to bed like a mother carrying a tired child. He'd rest his head against her shoulder, breathing warm and slow against her neck. She told herself it was fine, that he was just aging, that some dogs just got a little slower, a little softer, but deep down she knew, the vet confirmed it on a quiet Tuesday in July, degenerative myelopathy, a progressive disease. No pain, they said, just loss, gradual paralysis. No known cure. Lily sat across from the vet, her hand buried in Chance's fur, heart pounding so loud she could barely hear the words being spoken. He might have 6 months, the vet said gently. Maybe less. He'll start losing control of his hind legs. And eventually, he'll lose bladder function too. Lily nodded. Her throat was too tight for words. As they left the office, Chance looked up at her, tail wagging softly. Unaware of the sentence written into his bones, she drove home with one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on his head, tears silently tracing the corners of her mouth. The next morning, she didn't go to work. She called in sick, not for herself, but for the time she knew she couldn't get back. That day, she made a list, things Chance loves, lying in the sunsteak, medium rare. That old yellow tennis ball, the jazz playlist she plays on Sundays, cuddling under fleece blankets watching birds from the window, her painting in the kitchen with him at her feet. She hung the list on the fridge. A reminder, not just of what made him happy, but of what she had to fight for. Even now, they did everything on that list. Every single day, people asked. how she was holding up. She said she was fine, strong, managing, but each time she had to help him stand or saw him slip trying to get to his bowl, her heart cracked a little more, his legs grew thinner, his breath heavier. The once silent apartment was now filled with the sounds of struggle nails scraping the floor, low whimpers, the steady sigh of decline. Still, he fought. He greeted her at the door when she came home. He wagged his tail when she sang to him. He licked her tears when she thought she was hiding them, and she fought too. She bought a harness to help him walk, installed ramps beside the stairs, replaced their long walks with trips to the park in her car, where he could lie in the grass and smell the wind. Their love became something quieter, deeper, not about play or energy, but about presence, about simply being together. One night, Lily woke to find Chance crying in his sleep, a soft, painful whimpering that broke the silence like a knife. She rushed to his bed and knelt beside him. It's okay. I'm here, she whispered, running her fingers through his fur. His eyes opened slowly, glassy and distant, and for the first time since she'd brought him home, Lily saw fear in them. Not the fear of the street, or thunderstorms, or memories, but the fear of leaving. Are you tired? She asked, her voice barely above a breath. Is it time? Chance rested his head on her lap and sighed. She cried quietly into his fur, stroking him like she used to when he was broken and shaking in that first winter together. And when the morning light began to slip through the window, she knew. He had given her everything. He had stayed as long as he could. Now it was her turn to let him go. The appointment was scheduled for the following Friday. Until then, Lily gave him everything he loved. She grilled steak and shared it with him on the porch, played jazz on the record player, and danced barefoot in the kitchen while he watched with tired eyes. Painted his portrait slow, careful strokes to preserve his face forever on canvas. Slept on the floor beside him so he wouldn't be alone, and on the last night she told him everything. How he had saved her. How she didn't know who she'd be without him. How she wasn't ready to say goodbye, but would do it anyway because she loved him enough to give him peace. Thank you, she whispered again and again until they both fell asleep. They drove to the vet the next morning with the windows down, the wind in his fur. He sat in the passenger seat, weak but awake, his head resting in her lap. She played the same jazz tune she had the first time he curled up beside her all those years ago. At the clinic, she held him close, kissed his head, told him he was the best thing that ever happened to her. And when the moment came, he looked up at her one last time, his eyes soft and trusting, and then slowly, peacefully, he slipped away. Mine. The silence was louder than she ever imagined. It greeted her at the door like a cruel echo. No click of nails on the hardwood. No soft huff from the living room. No slow wag of a tail that said, "You're home." Just stillness. Lily stood in the doorway for a long time, coat still on, keys in hand, staring at the spot where Chance used to wait for her, head low, ears perked, those amber eyes always shining like he'd been waiting his whole life just to see her again. Now the space felt hollow, too clean, too quiet. She dropped the keys into the bowl by the door and closed it behind her, the sound sharp and final. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't move to unpack. She just stood there in the dim gray hush of early evening and let the grief settle around her like fog. That night, she couldn't bring herself to sleep in the bed. She made a nest on the rug where Chance used to lie, wrapping herself in the same fleece blanket he loved, burying her face in it, hoping to find the faintest trace of his scent. She didn't cry, like she thought she would. The tears had already come and gone in waves during the past few days. Instead, she lay there completely still, like if she didn't move, time wouldn't either. Maybe she could pause everything. Maybe she could go back, but grief doesn't work like that. Love, when it's lost, doesn't fade quietly. It echoes. She returned to work a few days later. Miriam, her coworker, brought her coffee and a small bag of dog treats. For the next one, she said softly. Lily smiled, grateful, but couldn't bring herself to tell her the truth. There wouldn't be a next one, not yet. Maybe not ever. Back at home, the absence was everywhere. His bowls sat untouched by the kitchen corner. She knew she should put them away, but every time she reached for them, something inside her froze. His bed still lay by the window. The leash still hung on the hook. The tennis ball rolled under the couch, just barely visible. Every object was a memory. Every room, a wound. She couldn't open her sketchbook. Not since she finished his portrait. The last page now held his face painted carefully, with love and trembling hands, just days before he left. She had signed it in the corner with one small word, "Thank you." And she meant it, but now the thought of painting anything else felt wrong, like moving on would erase him. So instead she filled the silence with noise. TV shows she didn't watch, music she didn't hear. Audiobooks left running for hours while she stared out the window. Still, the quiet always found her in the end. In the clink of a spoon in an empty mug, in the way the sun hit the rug where he used to sleep. The moment she reached down instinctively to stroke his head and found only air. Grief is strange like that. It hides in routine. One morning, 2 weeks after he was gone, she found herself walking her usual path through the park, only this time, without a leash in her hand. She hadn't meant to come here. Her feet had just brought her. The grass was golden under the late summer sun. Children laughed by the pond. A jogger passed by with his husky trotting loyally beside him. Lily looked away, suddenly blinking hard. She sat on the old bench, the one she and Chance always rested on when his legs got tired. She ran her hand along the worn wood, closed her eyes, and for just a second she imagined him there, sitting beside her, panting softly, looking up at her with those gentle, knowing eyes. "I miss you," she whispered. A breeze stirred the leaves. The sunlight shifted, and Lily, for the first time, didn't fight the tears that followed. That night, something strange happened. She woke suddenly, heart pounding, skin cold, and felt the unshakable sense that she wasn't alone. There was no noise, no movement, just that feeling. She sat up slowly, her breath shallow. That's when she saw it. By the door, lying neatly on the mat, was Chance's leash. She had put it in a storage box days ago, sealed, packed away with his bowls and collar. But now it was here, laid out gently, like a message. She didn't understand it, couldn't explain it. She picked it up with shaking hands and held it close to her chest. And for the first time in days, she slept without fear. The next morning, something in her shifted. She didn't feel better, not in the way people expect you to feel after a certain number of days. But she felt less frozen, less numb. She made coffee, opened the windows, watered her plants. She even pulled out her sketchbook, flipped past Chance's portrait, and stared at the blank page beyond. She didn't draw. Not yet, but she didn't close it either. Later that week, she donated the unopened bags of dog food to a local shelter. The volunteer, a teenager with kind eyes, smiled and said, "Thank you." "We've had a lot of new arrivals lately." Lily hesitated. "New arrivals?" "Yeah, one just came in yesterday, real nervous. Scared of everything, poor thing, been through a lot." She nodded politely, turning to leave, but her steps slowed. As she passed the kennels. From behind a glass pane, she saw him, small, trembling, with big ears and wide, frightened eyes. Not Chance, not even close, but something about the way he looked at her. It was the same look Chance had given her under that rusted bench years ago. Not a plea, not desperation, just the faintest flicker of hope. Lily didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there with her heart pounding, that leash still tucked in her coat pocket. She wasn't ready, but maybe, just maybe, she was closer than she thought. Lily stood frozen in front of the kennel, the leash heavy in her pocket, her heart pounding in her chest. The dog inside was small, trembling, eyes wide like a frightened child lost in a storm. The same look Chance had carried when she found him years ago, unsure, but quietly hopeful. Her breath caught. She wasn't sure if she was ready. She wasn't sure if she ever would be. But something deep inside her stirred, a spark she hadn't felt in months. Slowly, she reached into her coat pocket and ran her fingers over the leash, smooth and familiar. It was a symbol of all the love she had given, all the healing she and Chance had shared, love that hadn't disappeared, only changed. That afternoon, she filled out the adoption papers. The shelter volunteer smiled warmly. You'll be giving that dog a new chance, just like you gave Chance. Lily nodded, tears pricking her eyes. I hope so. She left the shelter with a small crate, and a heart trembling between fear and hope. The dog, whom she named Hope, was timid at first. She spent the first night hiding under the couch, her body curled tight like a secret. Lily sat nearby, whispering soft words, her voice steady and warm. Hi, Hope, you're safe here. You don't have to be afraid. Slowly, day by day, Hope began to trust. She learned the feel of Lily's gentle hands, the warmth of the fleece. Blankets, the sound of soft jazz music playing in the background. She learned how to wag her tail without fear. Lily watched. Hope discover the world with cautious wonder, the way Chance once had, the way she herself had learned to trust again. After years of silence, and in doing so, Lily discovered something too, that love is never really lost. It doesn't vanish when someone leaves. It lives on in the memories, in the quiet moments, in the space between goodbye and hello. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Lily sat on the porch with Hope curled in her lap. She looked up at the sky. Feeling the weight of what had been and the lightness of what could be, Chance had rescued her in ways she never expected. And now, Hope was teaching her to rescue herself, to heal, to carry love forward. The leash in her hand was no longer a symbol of loss, but of new beginnings, and for the first time in a long time, Lily smiled.